Hi, welcome back to the Megalamukos. It's been a while. I got inspired, so I want to share something. It's Chanukah, Erev Shabbos Chanukah, so really busy day, but I got, again, inspired by the muses, and so I wanted to share with you. Last year, I was able to share on Chanukah in the light of the beautiful Chanukah licht. So this year, it's daytime. It's Erev Shabbos, so I won't be able to record this once the lights are lit. So I did, for authenticity's sake, I am sitting in front of my Chanukah, which is all prepared, Erev Shabbos, also for Motzei Shabbos. I have with me a dreidel, I have with me Chanukah cookies, and I have with me some sufganiyot, jelly donuts in honor of the holiday. So we're all set. So what I have today is sort of an introspective idea about the invisible Aleph, which I've talked to you about before. And it's sort of science and religion type of thing called the Electron cloud Aleph. It's thoughts on the Festival of Lights. Chanukah is called the Festival of Lights. It was very special light, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, that one cruse of oil with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. And so we're celebrating the existence of light, which is really at the root of all of our existence. So here we are. Let me get started. Slides. Okay. So I have here a picture of the electromagnetic spectrum and light, showing that increasing wavelength in one direction, increasing energy in the other. And of course, when I say light, you might think of Roy G. Biv, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, violet, blue, indigo, violet. But the visible spectrum of light, the colors of the rainbow, are a tiny fraction of the whole spectrum. Okay, so it goes here from gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet rays, which you can't see them, but you feel them on your skin. That's how you get a tan. Infrared rays, which we use in technology a lot of times. Radar, FM, TV, shortwave, AM. So there's a really broad spectrum of light. And the Aleph, the Hebrew word for light, of course, is or, Aleph of Resh. And that's very important. And the first letter Aleph, which in my counting is the first letter of the Torah, I've talked about this before, the first letter of the Torah that everybody knows is base. There's a big base in the word Bereshis, but base has on it sort of two pointers. It has what are called crowns, and one is pointing up. And the Gemara in Chagiga says that, you ask the base, which is the bayit, the housing of the universe, who created you? And it points up. And they say, and what's his name? And he points back. And it's Aleph, Aleph Shmo. The name of the creator is Aleph. The word Aleph in Hebrew is related to the word Aleph, 1,000. It's related to the word Aluf, for a chief, the boss. So God is the great boss, the creator of everything. And one of the best ways that we have a sense of seeing, feeling God's presence in our world is through light. The sun, of course, is really powerful heavenly body that influences us with light and heat. And God created the sun as a shamash, as a faithful servant. We make a bracha on the moon. We have Birkas Achama once in 28 years. So light, or Hashem, there's a Kabbalistic term called or Ein Sof, unending light, okay, infinite light. And, people have had, that sort of out of body death experience and come back to tell about it. They talk about a great light, a tunnel of great white light and so forth. So our association between light and as that being an emanation of God's presence, his visible presence, as it were, in this world, is something I think familiar to all of us. And I'm relating it to the letter Aleph, the beginning of the word or, Aleph, and that's very important. So we're talking about the letter Aleph, and we're talking about the full spectrum of light, not only visible light, but even light that's beyond what we can see with our eyes, the full spectrum of energy, essentially. And given Einstein that, E equals mc squared, without understanding all the depth of the physics, we understand that energy and matter are really on the spectrum of the same thing. So when we talk about the creation of light, that's essentially the creation of matter. And for us is existence. So light is the most, it's ethereal and you can't touch it and in a sense can't feel it. and we can just barely see it, but it's at the core of everything that we are. That's the first thing God created, really. So I'm back in the first day of creation, in the first chapter of Bereshit in Genesis. Vayomer Elohim yihi or vayihi or. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Vayar Elohim es haor ki toiv. God saw the light, that it was good. Okay, and this light that we're talking about is a light that you and I have never seen. Okay, this light is truly good and doesn't have in it any evil. It's totally pure. So Hashem, Rashi explains that Hashem saw that this light, it's not worthy for the wicked to have access to this light. And our world, which is so complicated and such a mixture of good and bad, that it's inappropriate that that great light will be shining in this world at this time in history. So what Hashem did is Vayavdil Elohim ben haor uben hachoshech. He differentiated between the light and darkness, and part of that is the difference between day and night. That's the continuation of the verses there. But again, midrashically, Rashi explains that this first primordial light that God created on this first day of creation, he put it away. He put it into Geniza, okay, into storage, la'atid lavo, for the future and the world to come, where the righteous will be able to benefit and enjoy and bask in that great divine light which God created on the first day of creation. So that, of course, is the light that, well, what we're going to talk about today, it's sort of hiding in the Chanukah candles, that great light. It's the light that's hiding in the Torah Shebaal Peh. Okay, so we have glimpses of it, we have reflections of it, but it's not fully present in our world. I wanted to give you another example of an invisible light, or a light beyond the visible spectrum, that is a part of the world of Chazal. There's a Gemara in Nida and elsewhere that talks about what a baby is doing in utero, and he's learning Torah, and that's part of the celebration of a Shalom Zachar as we go to meet with the baby after he stopped learning Torah in utero and he's come out into this world. It's as if he's in mourning over his loss of learning. But how is he learning in utero? So the Gemara uses what I would call poetic language, that there is a ner daluk al roshoi, shebo roya misoifa oilam be'ad soifa. There is, as it were, a candle lit above the baby, the fetus's head. And through that light of this candle, you can see from one end of the world to the other. So obviously, it would hurt that mother if there was a candle lit inside her uterus. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a spiritual or poetic candle. And this candle shines a light, which is not a light that we can see in this world. It's like the Oraganuz. It's the hidden light. And that light is somewhat similar to, X-rays or maybe even gamma rays, that you can see through things. Okay, certainly with X-rays we do that. And this light is so great that not only can you see through physical objects, but you can see from one end of the world to the other. So really nothing stands as an impediment to the radiation of this light. So that's a very great light. And again, it's a light that we all, God willing, will get to at some point in the future. Right now, we'll have to make do with the visible spectrum. Okay, so we're talking about the Or, which starts with Aleph. And this particular Aleph that I've mentioned, the invisible Aleph, that's before the base of Bereshit at the beginning of the Torah. And now, if you picture in your mind an Aleph, I've helped you here, put one on the screen. And so an Aleph has an upper figure, a middle line, and then a lower figure. And but there's actually 5 ways that you could make it using the fundamental letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And it's actually made in different ways in different places in the Torah, or according to the Kabbalists or the expert Soifrim, there's different ways. And the Megala Mukos has a beautiful explanation. There's 5 different formats, 5 different forms of the Aleph. And I'm going to go through them one by one. And I just want to share that, Chazal say that in the creation of light, okay, it says the word light, or 5 times. Let me count those. Vayomer Elohim yihi or, vayihi or. Vayar Elohim es haor ki toiv. Vayavdil Elohim ben haor uben hachoshech. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom. So in the first day of creation, it says the word light 5 times. And that's really significant, because there are 5 different formats of the Aleph, which correspond to those 5 different lights Chazal in the Midrash Rabbah connect those 5 iterations of the word light to Chamisha Chumshei Torah, to the 5 books of the Chumash. And so we can recognize that there's, again, like a spectrum of light and energy that are being expressed through these different lights and fundamentally through the Aleph and the shape of the Aleph. So we're going through now one by one, 5 different compositions of the letter Aleph. The first one is Yudva Yud, okay? A Yud above. The line in the middle, which is sort of like the Rakia, it's a dividing line between the upper realm and the lower realm, maybe between spirituality and physicality. So so you always have that line. That line is sort of the connection between the infinite and the finite universe in which we live. So that Vav is a constant, okay? But what's above and what's below varies in these different iterations of light of the Aleph. So the first one is Yud Vav Yud. That's a very common one, maybe the most common. And of course, the gematria, the numerical value of those letters. Yud is 10, so 2 times 10 is 20, and the Vav makes 6, so 26. 26, of course, is a really important number to us because it's Yud K Vav K. The name of God, the 4-letter name of God, Yud K Vav K, equals 26. So this iteration of the Aleph, Yud Vav Yud, somehow is representative of the Shem Havaya itself, of God's great name. So that's a very, very classical and fundamental shape of the Aleph. Let's go on. The second shape is Yud Vav Daled. And that's a really important one because Yud can be portrayed as a single dot, okay? A drop of ink on the page can be a Yud. The Vav is a line and the Daled is 2 lines. And so this particular form of the Aleph of dot, line, plane, 2 lines don't necessarily make a plane, I know that, but here I think they do make a plane. So you have point, line, plane, which is the evolution of 3-dimensional reality coming into existence through this letter Aleph that Hashem began everything with before he even wrote the rest of the Torah with Bereshis. So this Yud, again, which is very classic Yud, Yud Vav Daled, is gematria of 20. And so usually in most calculations, when you calculate the gematria of the letter Yud, you use the number 20. These are some less common Alephs that you may not know about, but again, the Megala Mukos talks about them. So Yud Vav Reish, because remember, the Reish and the Daled are really similar, right? The Daled has a point and the Reish is curvy. So instead of having the Daled on the bottom, you have a Reish. And I was sort of debating with myself how exactly to draw these and to depict them, but I always kept the Yud on top. I think the Yud is always on top. I mean, theoretically, we could come up with other ways to depict the Aleph. We could have Daled Vav Daled, or even Reish Vav Reish, or stuff like that. But I think always the Yud stays on top because the Yud, like I said, is a single point, an indivisible point. It's coming from like the Big Bang, like from nothingness. It's the Yesh Mi'ayin. It's Hashem beginning the creation from a single indivisible point. So I think the Aleph should always start on top, which again is the spiritual realm. It's the realm above and beyond any dividing line. So always you have a Yud on top. And so the question is, what is the reflection of that Yud on the bottom? Is it a Yud, which is a beautiful reflection, Yud reflecting Yud? Is it a Daled, which would be, like we said, a plane being an expansion of a point in a line? In this case, Reish. Reish is 200 in gematria, and Reish is also the Rosh. It's the beginning, and it's the head. So that's also a beautiful letter to be at the bottom of the Aleph is the Reish, and the gematria then of the Aleph would be 216, which is a much larger number. So that gives us a lot of leeway to do a lot of things. The fourth Aleph we'll talk about is Yud Vav Vav, and the Vav is like a straight line. So you could have the Yud on top, the Vav cutting the middle, and then a Vav below. If we think of the Yud as a point, the Vav as a line, so what we've done is extend the Yud a little bit to turn it into a Vav, and the gematria of that Aleph would be 22, which is the letters of the Aleph base. There are 22 letters of the alphabet, so 22 is a really important number. So then that Aleph contains within it everything that might be created with all the letters of the Aleph base. Okay, so that's Yud Vav Vav. And that's also really important because Yud and Vav are 2 letters of the Shem, Yud K Vav K. Without the Hey, the 2 letters are Yud and Vav. So those are letters of divinity. Those are letters, they're masculine letters of power. They're letters that have no receptacle to receive anything. They're just unlimited power of giving. The Yud in a spiritual sense, and the Vav extending and hooking on. Remember that Vav is the Hebrew word meaning hook. So the Vav is an extender, a hook, a connector. So the Vav is an extension of that infinite spiritual reality and turning it into a physical reality that's connected to spirituality, so it's transcendent. So that's Yud Vav Vav. So the one I'm going to conclude with today is really the one I want to talk about, and that is, interestingly, two Vavs in the middle, Yud Vav, Vav Yud. And I never would have guessed this one, but again, I saw it explicitly in the Megala Mukos. So we now have 4 letters in the composition of our Aleph. You have a Yud Vav, and then a Vav Yud on the bottom. And so that line in the middle is doubled, which sort of makes sense that the dividing line between, let's say, the spiritual world and the physical world is double. It has one barrier, or let's call it a membrane. It has a membrane, an inner or upper membrane, and a lower membrane. And now it's an exact mirror of itself, Yud Vav and Yud Vav, which I just said are really important letters of spiritual power, of giving, of masculinity. So, of course, the gematria of Yud Vav Vav Yud is 32. Okay, the Vavs are 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 plus 20 is 32. And 32, again, a really important number. Sounds like all the numbers are really important, and they are. But 32 corresponds to Lamed Beis Nesivois HaChochma, the 32 paths of wisdom through which Hashem created everything. And one allusion to that is that the Shem Elokim, the name of God used in Ma'aseh Bereshis, in the creation of the universe, is Elokim, and it's written 32 times in the 6 days of creation. And I could talk a lot about the 32 paths of wisdom, but it's not our topic for today, so I'll just leave it at that. The 32 is a primal number of paths through which Hashem brought existence into being. But what occurred to me, and this is sort of a gift from God for this holiday of Chanukah this year, I got the idea that this particular Aleph, who has gematria of 32, we could actually augment its gematria to 36. Because one of the methodologies of finding secrets and meaning in the letters of the Hebrew alphabet and in words in gematria is you may add the number of letters. So in this Aleph, we have a gematria of 32, but we can add the 4 letters, the Yud, Vav, Vav, Yud. And so now we have 32 plus 4, which of course equals 36. And 36 is also a really special number. Why? For one thing, it's the number of Hanukkah candles that you will light. If you light on the first night 1, and the second night 2, and the third night 3, which the Gemara calls Mahadrin min Mahadrin, the nicest, most beautiful way to light the Chanukiah is to increase by 1 each night, showing the advancement and augmentation and the growth of the miracle night by night, that this one little cruse of oil continued to burn and shine brightly for 8 full days. So you'll end up lighting 8 plus 7 plus 6 plus 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1. And that, of course, equals 36. So the number of 36 lights is a really important number in Hanukkah, but there's more depth to that number. And that number 36 is, again, Chazal tell us this, that when Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve were created in the Garden of Eden, we talked about the great light that Hashem created, and he put it into safekeeping for the future. But before they had sinned, he exposed them to, again, this Ora Ganuz, this really special light. And even after they sinned, it was already Erev Shabbos. It was the time just like right now, it's Erev Shabbos. And Hashem gave them a reprieve. And he allowed them to stay in the Garden of Eden for Shabbos with the great light. We know that we light a candle for Havdalah, celebrating the creation of light, Motzei Shabbos. Well, where was light from before on Shabbos and on Friday? Friday was light out. But when it became Shabbos, it got dark. So the answer is there was essentially an iteration of Ora Ganuz. Okay, this great hidden light that we will see, Lasi Lavo, in the future was present in the Garden of Eden. For how many hours? Guess? The answer is 36. So the candles of Hanukkah that we light to commemorate the miracles and the holiday and the salvation and the victory that Hashem brought us in days of yore, in the times of the Maccabees, correspond to this great hidden light, which we will enjoy in the future. And so the 36 hours that Adam and Eve had this light correspond to the 36 candles, which we light on the Festival of Lights of Chanukah. So I just want to finish up now a little bit of chemistry. I actually was fortunate enough to take chemistry at Columbia University. I'll just share a drop of history. Everybody knows that the atomic bomb was developed by the United States of America during World War II. Let's call it, in a good way, to put an end to the war, which it did. It was called the Manhattan Project. And the reason it was called the Manhattan Project, yes, because it was developed in Manhattan. Where? In Columbia University. And I actually was fortunate. I think his name was Professor Fine. And Professor Fine was my professor, and he once showed us a slideshow of his colleagues who had been on that team of chemists and physicists who had worked on the Manhattan Project. And so these were real leaders. Of course, Einstein was a part of it. Some were German Jews like Einstein and others. And this was, again, in Manhattan. And I got to be at least in the same laboratory that they had worked, though I think I got a C in the class. I'm not a great chemist. But I do love some of the ideas of chemistry. And one of them is Niels Bohr's model of the atom. Sorry if you can't see it well here. Niels Bohr was a Danish Jew, and he got a Nobel Prize. And he had a really, I think this is the most familiar structure of the atom that people know, that there's a nucleus, a proton has a positive charge, and there are electrons that go around the nucleus. Electrons have a negative charge. So there's this electromagnetic connection and a nuclear thing and some gravity, whatever. The electrons are going around the protons. And I'll read what it says. The electrons revolve around the nucleus in definite energy levels called orbits or shells in an atom without radiating energy. As long as an electron remains in a shell, it never gains or loses energy. So it's sort of rigid structure and fixed that the electrons are in particular shells. And it's a beautiful idea, and I think it helps all of us to understand a little bit about, atomic energy and understanding atoms, but it's probably not so realistic that there are these shells. And so already when I was in college, we learned about a more advanced model of the atom, and it's called the electron cloud model. And this has to do with quantum mechanics and something called the Heisenberg indeterminacy principle, that you can never really know where an electron is. Because if you shine an electron microscope on it, you'll move the electron out of place. So you can't know at any given time where an electron is, but you can, we could predict it. We could measure in terms of probability of where electrons tend to hang out. And that's what the electron cloud model is. And so you see in this picture that it's sort of fuzzy, and that as you get farther away from the nucleus, the electrons are less likely to be there. And as you get close to the nucleus, they're much more likely to be there. But they're in a constant state of flux, and they are not in definitive energy levels. They're flying all over the place, basically. They're attracted, they're connected to the nucleus, but they're doing their own thing in a sort of disorderly, random fashion. So that's the electron cloud model of the atom, to the extent that I'm able to explain it. Here's how I want to apply it to our Aleph, okay? So the Megalamukos taught us 5 distinct structures of the Aleph, and I depicted those for you. They have particular geometrias. They're made of specific Hebrew letters. But I'm today proposing the electron cloud theory of Alephs. And it presumes that these 5 Alephs, and again, remember, I'm focusing a little bit on that great Aleph, the invisible Aleph, that precedes the base of Bereshis. So it's the invisible Aleph at the beginning of the Torah, which really all of the Torah and all of existence stem from the existence of that invisible Aleph. And it's not one Aleph, it has 5 different forms. That's what we would have said until today. But today, what we've been mechadesh is that these 5 Alephs are in a constant state of flux, giving rise to the full range of physical and spiritual energy and light. So all the way from the geometrias, the lowest one we had was 20, up to the gematria of 216 when we added a ration to it. And if we can think about the Vav as being an axis and the Yud as being like an electron that is revolving around the axis, there's constant motion in these Alephs. And between the different forms of the Aleph, it's all going on at all times in a somewhat random, if you will, way that Hashem is maintaining the existence of the universe, all of physical and spiritual energy and light. And it's all coming from the motion within these invisible Alephs that are the electron cloud theory of Alephs. So I hope you liked it. It had some meaning for you. It has a lot of meaning for me. And it's a celebration of the Festival of Light by Yamim Hahem Bezman Hazeh, the great miracles Hashem did by showing us this hidden light. We're celebrating it still today. So I wish everybody a Freilichen Chanukah, a happy Chanukah, a Lichtike Chanukah, a Chanukah of light, celebration, you and your family, for the whole world. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.